Hello, everyone, and welcome to Franchise Spotlight. I had no idea how we were going to handle that one.
Welcome to Franchise Spotlight. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the whole trilogy of Back to the Future, which was directed by Robert Zemeckis, starring Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd.
I hate you so goddamn much.
Leah Thompson and Thomas F. Wilson.
Yes,
Buford,
Thomas Wilson, yes. And Crispin Glover once, which we'll get into here in a second.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and get this rolling. So coming out in 1985 is the star-studded fucking classic movie Back to the Future, the first installment. So let's go ahead and get this rolling. I didn't mean to hit that, but go ahead and get this rolling with your thoughts and opinions on it.
Well, Back to the Future is one of those rare movies that I would describe as absolutely perfect.
Okay.
I love Back to the Future. I actually just recently got the chance to see it on a big screen in the theater with a crowd. Safely sitting apart, though. Don't worry.
Social distancing, unlike what we're doing right now.
Yeah, this is not it. This is not how you do it. But it was an absolutely fantastic time, and of course, it wasn't the first time I've seen it. I grew up watching this movie with my mamaw. I used to wear out this VHS tape so much when I was really, really young. It's such. I wouldn't describe many movies as just pure cinematic magic than this movie. And there's a plethora of reasons for that, which I'll dive into unless you want to give overall thoughts before we get into specifics.
Yeah, I'll give my overall thoughts. This movie is, my favorite adjective, fun. You can't help but have a good time when you watch this. Every movie that deals with time travel establishes their own rules and laws of time travel, and I think this movie does it exceptionally well.
Yes.
Because it doesn't just lay everything out at once. As it goes, they kind of describe how time travel works.
It slowly peels back the curtain as you watch the movie.
And I think it does a fantastic job of describing those rules, because it's not like forcing it down your throat while you're watching it. It's just like, why is this happening? Oh, because there's this rule that they just explained, and it's not spoon-fed to you either. It makes sense in the context of the movie.
Yes, and diving into specifics of, excellent things about this film, one of them being just the overall chemistry between Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox. They are so well on screen together.
You made it!
Yeah.
Welcome to my latest experiment. This is the big one, the one I've been waiting for all my life.
And specifically the performance of Christopher Lloyd. Doc Brown is such an iconic role and just such an iconic performance that you could see someone remotely dressed as Doc Brown and just recognize who they are by how they act, the over-the-top mannerisms, the, great Scott. There's so much to do with that character, and Christopher Lloyd just perfectly embodies every part of that character.
Absolutely. He's such a fantastic physical actor in this, because he has to be, well, not necessarily he has to be, but he is just over the top with his mannerisms, like you said. Just a great physical actor with his comedic timing, with his eyes and looking around.
The best eye acting in the entire world is this guy in this movie. Michael J. Fox does a great job as well, too. But overall, the cast does an excellent job. And especially when they have to be covered in the makeup that makes them look old, which is kind of jarring after you've seen them young. But in the beginning, it wasn't that bad. But then once you see them young and go back, you're like, oh God!
It looks kind of rough. Yeah.
But you guys, Crispin Glover as George McFly. Oh my God!
You see us struggling in the car. You walk up, you open the door, and you say, "You're lying, George."
Oh, hey you, get your damn hands off her. You really think I ought to swear?
Fucking unbelievable performance. He's so good, and it breaks my heart that he distances himself from these movies, which we're going to get into why once we get to the second film. But God, every scene he's in, he just chews the scenery and steals it. He plays that perfect, awkward, false hope kind of character, and it's just so almost cringy to see, but you're supposed to feel that way by how he's doing the performance. It's just so funny.
Absolutely. And one takeaway that I had when watching this movie again was I love whenever Michael J. Fox goes back into the past, and he's talking to Doc Brown, and he says, geez, Doc, that's heavy. And Doc is just like, what does weight have to do with this? Because he doesn't understand the 80s lingo, because it's obviously 30 years in the past.
Your sister will follow, and unless you repair the damage, you'll be next.
Sounds pretty heavy.
Weight has nothing to do with it.
And it's little things like that help you as a viewer tell like what timeline they're in and what Doc Brown is on screen at a time with little things like that.
Yeah, and this whole franchise, but specifically this movie, is full of great bits and running jokes, like hey, why do you have a life jacket on? Like that whole bit is hilarious.
Oh, he must be in the Coast Guard.
Yeah, and I love the bit with the mayor who's the janitor at the restaurant, and then he goes, I'm going to do something with my life, and then Marty's like, that's right, he's going to be mayor, and then he goes,
Mayor.
Yeah. I love that little bit, and there's so many, like, this movie's attention to detail is amazing. Like a bit that I was discussing with Ryan earlier is there's a scene in the 1985 originally they meet up at Twin Pines Mall, but then when Marty goes back in time, he runs over the pine of who would eventually be the owner of the mall, and it becomes the Lone Pine Mall, which is just funny little shit like that.
Yeah.
And the overall writing of this film, the screenplay, is actually quite brilliant. In the first act, there's some dialogue that's kind of cheesy, but I think they're just overemphasizing like how he deals with bullies and with Biff and things like that. But once he, goes back to 1955, and you start to see more, and that script unravels. There's so much great setup in the movie, like when he's making out with his girlfriend and then save the clock tower, and you think that that's just this girl being annoying, but it's actually setting something up for much later. Yep. And something that this movie does that I love is it will set up the audience, to know something and then let the characters find out. But the audience is always one step ahead of the movie until the end, and then that's why suspense gets felt, which we'll get into later. But, like, for example, there's a scene in 1955 when they're trying to figure out how they're going to isolate a bolt of lightning into the time machine, and then Marty shows Doc something that's written on the back of the newspaper of the 1985 newspaper that says lightning strikes clock tower 30 years ago.
10:04 p.m.
Yeah. And he's like, God, like look at the back. No, he's talking about his girlfriend. He goes, look, this is her phone number. Like, look how much she loves me. And then so Doc is reading the back of it, but the audience sees the other side of the newspaper that has the lightning striking the clock tower. And they were just talking about how are we going to isolate lightning. So the audience is like, oh fuck, you got to use the clock tower. And then 2 minutes later, oh wait, we know when it's going to strike. And then so it's like just that little pacing. It's almost used for pacing.
Yeah.
And it was done really well, I think. And I like little things like that in the movie.
And even like the opening, because I don't think there's a character on screen for the first 3 or 4 minutes, because it's just going through like a bunch of clocks and articles that were written about this once great professor, or this doctor rather, and just telling his life story, everything you need to know about him, about how he was kind of like a nutcase, and well, there's a whole theory behind why he's a nutcase, if you want to go ahead and get into that.
Yes. Doc Brown is definitely suicidal. In Back to the Future Part 1, it's a fan theory that I think we both subscribe to. There are little details in the movie, like, for example, it's very much implied that he wants to crack time travel or die trying. And when he puts Einstein in the car to be the test, he actually steps in front of the DeLorean, so either he succeeds or he dies. And he infamously tells Marty, hey, like, I got the idea for the flux capacitor because I was hanging up a clock and then I slipped and hit my head on the sink in the bathroom. Well, I think he was very much implied that he was trying to hang himself, and then it broke and he hit his head, thought of the idea for time travel, then devoted his life to trying to figure out that thing before he, bit the dust. And I think part of the reason, because, like, there's a penultimate scene where Marty convinces him he's from the future when he says, no, you told me, I know how you got that scar. You said you were hanging up a clock and you slipped and you hit your head on the sink, and then that's where you got the idea for the flux capacitor. And I think that Doc Brown had just come up with that cover story in his head and hadn't told anybody yet, but he was going to tell people that's what happened.
Yeah.
So when Marty told him his cover story, that's how he actually knew he was from the future, because he's like, how did he know that that's the lie I was going to tell? So I think that's what convinced him otherwise of where he is. And it's interesting to think about when you see it.
And there's hundreds of videos if you search it and find it with like people diving deep into this movie. But that's pretty much just a quick overview, which is a very fascinating theory once you think about it, because the DeLorean is coming straight at Doc Brown, and Michael J. Fox steps out of the way, and Doc brings him back in front of it, because it's like you said, either he succeeds or he dies trying. You know, it's very fascinating, very dark theory.
Yeah, but also something that I think this movie deserves credit for is how funny it is. It's a hilarious movie.
It is.
You know, like, and also the action, it shows what a smart character Marty McFly is. Like, whenever he's on the skateboard in the 50s and he rips the thing off, and the way he maneuvers around people and, like, sending Biff into the Tower of Shit. It's so funny.
I will say Biff is one of my favorite antagonists of all time.
And
He's just like this dumb meathead, like, hey, butthead.
Yeah.
Like,
hello, McFly, anybody home? Like, and just the performance is so good.
Yeah.
And
of all the characters and all the actors, I think do it.
Leah Thompson does a great job as Marty McFly's mother as well, especially in the sequels. She does great in all of the movies.
Yeah.
And ironically, the actress who plays Jennifer, his girlfriend, in the first movie is a different actress in the second and third movie. They recast her because right after Back to the Future came out, her mother was diagnosed with cancer. So she quit acting to, like, help her mom. And she didn't start another movie until, like, 2008.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but ironically, kind of like Evil Dead, Back to the Future wanted to show the ending scenes of the previous movie in each of the sequels. So they reshot the end of Back to the Future 1 with the new actress, because Jennifer's in the final scenes.
Yeah.
So when you watch Back to the Future 2, it's not the same scene. They literally reshot it with the new actress and just did like a shot-by-shot remake of the end of the film, which I think is another interesting thing about it. One thing that I think Back to the Future gets unfairly criticized for is the silly thing with the picture and, like, watching his siblings disappear. And yeah, on paper that is kind of silly, but I think the way it's used as sort of the ultimate suspense tool, like, you kind of think it's silly when you watch it, but it does provide a timeline, and it provides a sense of urgency for them to complete their mission. But also, when he's fucking playing the guitar and then he can't, and then he starts to disappear. Like, I remember being a kid and being like, no!
like, you're so close!
Yeah. Like, so I think that that's unfairly criticized for that. I mean, and there are some things that don't age well in the movie, like the infamous John Mulaney bit where he's like, and we're going to imply that a white man wrote Johnny Be Good, so we're going to take that from him. You know, there's stuff like that in the movie. That's unfortunate, but overall, such a great fun movie.
It's a lot of fun. It has humor. It has heart. I will say, of all of them, I think this is the one that takes itself the most serious.
Probably.
And when you watch the other ones, you can kind of see that. But going on to the next one, which I believe came out in 1987, 88, is Back to the Future Part 2. Very original.
Maybe even 89. I think it was 89 and 90.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But like you said, they reshot the final scene in Back to the Future, the first part. And then that's how the second part opens.
Yes.
Again, starring everyone except the girlfriend was recast. In this movie, they go to the future to look at Marty's kids and help them. And then they go back to the past to 85. And then they
only
go
to find
back,
out that shit's fucked. Only to go back to 1955 into the first movie to reset some shit.
Which is... This movie has a lot going on.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Oh, I have notes.
And you know what? When they went back to 1955, they really fucked everything up because 2015 passed and we didn't have flying cars, we didn't have hoverboards.
I know, assholes.
But the style was pretty
honestly,
cool.
The self-tying Nikes is what I really, really wanted.
Yeah, that'd be rad. The hoverboard too? Are you kidding me?
Yes. Oh, one of the things I put in my notes, I have pros and cons about this movie.
Okay, go ahead.
It conflicts me a little bit. Same thing with the third one, but... this movie does something, a pro in this movie is that it does do a good job expanding onto the Back to the Future universe. Because you know, when this first film was so successful, they were discussing ideas of like, okay, what if they went to the future? What if they did this? What if they did this? And it sets up the world nicely. And the flying DeLorean is famous.
So cool.
Yeah, and you know, the way that it was able to feel like a natural continuation of that first movie.
Hey, Doc, you better back up. We don't have enough road to get up to 88.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Hey, Marty! Marty, I wanted to show you these new matchbooks for my auto detailing I had printed up.
Flying DeLorean?
Also, This is the first film role for Elijah Wood. Did you know that?
I did. He is the video game arcade boy.
Yes, nice little cameo from Frodo Baggins.
Mm-hmm.
Nice to see. Another thing that I have is I love the idea of the sports almanac in the movie.
Being the pivotal point.
Yeah, and I also like that of all the things it predicted, it didn't predict like the internet, so like almanacs are a thing in 2015. But because honestly, you can ask yourself that question like,
oh, I just like smacked the shit out of that. I am so sorry, guys.
Like you can ask yourself the question of like, would I take the almanac? It's like, fuck yeah, I take the almanac. I'm not morally above doing that.
And you have to think about it from his perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Marty McFly is a 17-year-old kid in high school who wants to be a rock star and make all this money. And what's the quickest way to fame is predicting the future.
Yeah, and there's an interesting scene where Doc Brown kind of like gives him shit, like, no, you can't take the sports almanac. But it's not necessarily he doesn't want him to get rich. He's just like, you're gonna really fuck with time if you take this thing, you know. And the fact that it ends up in Biff's hands, of course, is what drives the story forward eventually. But one of the cons that I do have is that there's less attention to detail in this movie. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really seem as tightly put together as the first movie. And also, a lot of the first act of the movie kind of relies on it being the future. Because they're pretty much just doing the same things that they did in the middle of the first film. Even to the point where the Biff character says there's something really familiar about all of this. And they literally just kind of did it again, but it's in the future. Like this time, instead of a skateboard, it's a hoverboard. And, you know, so like
going around and he crashes into a thing of shit.
And I was more interested in Marty McFly just like exploring, like walking around before they did the actual, like just trying to redo things again. And it kind of like fakes out the audience and setting up like it's going to be about the future, and then turns out no, that's not what it's about. So I'll give the movie a pass there, even though it's kind of messy, because I feel like, I don't know this for sure, but I feel like that was a marketing trick. Like it was marketed about it's going to be about the future, and then after the first act they're out of the future. So I felt like maybe that was just to keep the audience on their toes.
I will say a lot of the things, speaking about the future, that I really did like were a lot of the things in the background, like the whole like Jaws 19, and then if you look at the marquee, it says directed by Max Spielberg. I don't know if that's his son's actual name or if that's just like whatever. But just like little things like that in the background, I really like. Yeah,
and also one of the things that I also like about this film is, like the first one, just the chemistry between Marty McFly and Doc Brown, and also the recurring jokes are still really funny in the future as well. It kind of doubled down into Marty's family in the future, which was kind of... there's a lot of setup for the third one. The second one and third one are very closely knit movies. Like, you can have the first movie and not have 2 and 3, but you can't have 2 and not have 3. Like, they even set up things in 2 that later get paid off in 3. Like when Marty watches the Clint Eastwood movie where he uses the bulletproof vest and
which is a huge point in the third movie.
And also... that's when Jennifer finds out that he crashed a Rolls Royce. And, that's a great thing that I love in this movie, that is in this movie and in the third movie, was the chicken bit.
Stick your card in the slot and I'll handle it. Unless you want everyone in the division to think you're chicken.
Like how Marty McFly doesn't like to be called chicken. Because it was honestly like one of the, especially in the 80s, it was a lesson on, don't try to be this macho person or else it's going to come back and bite you in the ass. Because every time Marty succumbs to that, it ruins his life a little bit more and more. And you see him learn that lesson throughout the second and third movie. But I thought that was an interesting character thing to introduce into this movie, was the idea of him slowly succumbing to, I want to say almost like toxic masculinity in a way, of him not being able to control the things people say to him. I thought that was just an interesting thing to add into the movie.
It absolutely is. I agree, because he kind of learns from that, and in the third movie, plans ahead because of the Clint Eastwood movie. But still, he doesn't like to be called chicken, and he doesn't back down from a fight either. And it's really fascinating, like you said, how they dive into his family a lot deeper, especially whenever they're at the Cafe 80s and his son is a wimp and he realizes that, so he has to
great dual performance there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Be the man and stick up towards Griff, I think his name is.
Biff and Griff, yeah.
Biff, Griff, and Buford.
Yeah.
God. Oh boy.
Something else, a big positive of this movie is that this movie is fun as hell. It's just a big
it doesn't take itself seriously like the first one did.
But a huge negative two huge negatives for me on this movie. One is it's a very messy movie. Like, so much goes on, and it doesn't quite know how to balance it all. Like, you gotta just kind of watch, and just hopefully it'll make sense later. And the exposition in this film isn't quite as well done as the first film. Because in the first film, whenever exposition was happening, when you were learning more about the time machine, you're also just learning more, and the scene would remain interesting. So, like, when you're learning more about the DeLorean in the first movie, you also find out, like, oh, there might be Libyan terrorists after us. So the whole time there's suspense, and you're learning about the time machine. So it's multiple things happening at once, whereas this movie and part 2 will literally stop to give you exposition, and that was a little bit annoying. But I think my overall big negative with this movie is the fact that there's a major inconsistency in it, and I didn't even pick it up until the most recent time we rewatched it. And it's how Old Man Biff steals the DeLorean, goes back in time, it's in 1955, gives it to Biff, goes back to 2015, drops the car off, and then Marty and Doc Brown go back to 1985 and find out everything's messed up. Well, Marty suggests, why don't we just go back to 2015 and stop Biff? And Christopher Lloyd is like, well, no, we can't, because that future doesn't exist anymore. And it's like, well, shouldn't that have happened when Biff went back in time?
And then came back to 2015.
Like, wouldn't that 2015 just have ceased to exist? And then you're like, all right, well, maybe it takes time. Well, when they drop Jennifer off at her house and then go back to 1955, Marty says, oh my God, we just left Jennifer there. And Doc Brown's like, don't worry about it. As soon as we complete our mission, like right when we're done, that future will cease to exist and she'll be fine waking up at home. And it's like, which is it? You know, it wants to have its cake and eat it too a little bit.
And it's funny because like things like that don't really bother me because I did notice that when I was rewatching it. But I definitely can say you are a lot more critical on movies.
Well, I think the only reason it bothered me is because the first one was so airtight.
Yeah.
And the only complaint people have about the first one is like, how do his parents not recognize him? And it's like, the person who was in their life for 1 week.
Yeah.
Like, I've known people for a week, and I don't remember their fucking name or what they look like, you know? So I never really understood that criticism. But, like, other than that, the first movie is so airtight. And then you get to this movie, and it just let itself go in so many ways. But, I digress. A major, major positive about this film. Its third act, when they go back to 1955... is fucking unbelievable. Like, I compare how I kind of feel about this movie in a similar way to how I feel about Rogue One. And for anyone who's listened to us for any period of time knows, I think the first two acts of Rogue One aren't that great. They're not bad, but they're just kind of whatever. Not very well done, but could be worse. And then the third act is one of the greatest third acts in cinematic history. And it really kind of changes how you see the rest of that movie and saves it in a way.
Yeah.
Same thing with Back to the Future 2. One of the greatest third acts in cinematic history. And it really helps bring that story forward. And if that third act were any different, I would feel very differently about Back to the Future 2. But its third act is so well done, it's so well paced, and it's especially how it ends. Like when he gets that fucking letter and he goes, we were told to come here at this day at this time. And he goes, do you need any help? And he's like, there's only one man who can help me. And then it cuts to fucking 1955 Doc Brown. You're just like, oh, fuck yes, this is how I want this to end. Like,
it brings it full circle again at the end of this movie.
Such an incredible third act. And it really kind of puts to the wayside a lot of the negatives that come from the, previous 2/3 of the film.
And it's interesting that you bring that up because when you look at this movie, I think that the third act has to be as good as it is and as tight as it is because there is so much going on in the third act compared to the rest of the movie because they go back to 1955 and Doc Brown is like, you have to avoid your past self, which is your future self. So not only do they have to complete their mission by getting the almanac from Biff, but they have to avoid Biff because that Biff is dealing with the first Marty McFly, and then Doc Brown has to avoid Doc Brown, which he runs into him at the clock tower, and he's like avoiding him. He like backs up into him, and he's like, "Oh, do you really mean like this wrench instead?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, thanks." And it's just like it's close calls like that. You're just like, please don't recognize each other. Like just don't muck up anything. Yeah. And I think for that reason, because there's so much going on, it has to be airtight.
And I just remembered something, a little detail that they set up in this movie that I fucking love. That you didn't even realize was set up until later, was when Marty buys the sports almanac in 2015. The 80s shop lady It's like, oh yeah, this opens up with a dust buster because in the 80s people were afraid of dust getting on their paper before we had the automatic dust remover on our paper. And you just think like, oh, it's just needless dialogue. Well, later in the movie, when Marty McFly thinks he succeeds and has the almanac, he opens it and it was just that fake covering over a nude magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly that previous dialogue became set up for a crucial moment of like, oh no. So I thought that was clever of just like disguising that exposition as like a needless thing and then actually going full circle with that and leading it into suspense.
Yeah.
I thought was very well done. That was super random, but I just remembered it.
Yeah.
Before we go on to the third movie,
Yeah.
there's a major thing that happened behind the scenes of Back to the Future 2 that I think is really important to bring up since we're highlighting the franchise, if you will.
Because it changed, Hollywood and how it
Hollywood
works.
forever, yes. So Crispin Glover, who played George McFly excellently in Back to the Future Part 1, did not want to return for Back to the Future Part 2. He disagreed heavily with Robert Zemeckis on the ending of the Back to the Future 1. He did not like that when Marty came back from the past, that the family was rich all of a sudden, and he didn't like that the better finances equates to happiness, and that's why the family's doing better. He gets the car, and he's like, I think that's the wrong message of the movie. I think it should be that he just gets back and his family's happy. They disagreed. It was fine. And obviously he probably wanted a little bit more money, but the reason why he distances himself from the movies is because of what happened next. One, the producer of this film, named Bob Gale, started talking a bunch of shit about Crispin Glover, saying, oh, he demanded as much money as Michael J. Fox, and he did this and he did that, and that's why Crispin Glover will never forgive the franchise and not go back and do conventions or anything like that, is because of the producer kind of keeps running his mouth. But he's forgiven Robert Zemeckis because he went on to work with him again in Beowulf, and he said that they kind of buried the hatchet. Mm-hmm. But he sued Back to the Future 2 and Universal for a lot of money because when they did the makeup on Back to the Future 1 as an old man, they made a fake mold of his face. And they took those molds, remade the makeup, and applied it to a new actor for Back to the Future 2. And didn't really market that it was a new actor, and tried to trick audiences into thinking, oh, it's the same, it's still George McFly, when it wasn't at all. And he is watching the movie, or kind of hears about it, and is like, they totally just robbed my likeness. You've heard of likeness rights before. The reason you've heard of that is because of what happened. He sued Universal for a chunk of money for using his likeness and his image without permission. Mm-hmm. And that lawsuit got so heavy, and I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, I'm pretty sure that they settled for something around $760,000. They ended up paying Crispin Glover. Because they discovered it was cheaper to pay him than to, try to fight it in court. Mm-hmm. So they settled out of court for a lot of money. And because of that, SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, now has clauses preventing other studios from using likeness without payable transactions and permission. And it's all because of what happened on Back to the Future 2.
That's nuts.
It's gnarly that happened. Yeah. And you can actually watch interviews with Crispin Glover. He'll talk about it. Mm-hmm. He won't bring it up unprovoked, but if someone asks about it, he'll be like, oh yeah, here's exactly what happened. And he'll just go off. And it's really, really interesting.
That's
interesting
fascinating.
stuff.
I'll have to watch that because I knew some shady stuff happened on the producer side of that movie, mm-hmm. But I didn't know it was to that extent.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff.
Wow, really just changed everything.
Yeah.
Good for George McFly.
Good for Crispin Glover.
Yes.
Hey, you, get your damn hands off of her.
Oh. God. So with all that being said, let's move on to part 3.
Another page of notes.
Which came out in 1990, again starring the same cast, just looking a little bit different with the makeup. This time, Marty gets a letter from Doc Brown saying he's all the way back in 1885 because at the end of the second movie, he was struck by lightning and it really screwed up the time circuits. And, wow, you want to have a fun Western to watch? This fulfills your needs for that. I don't think this movie takes itself seriously at all. I think this is the most fun of the trilogy. Mm-hmm.
It's super fun.
It is. And he has 1955 Doc Brown helping him. And I absolutely love whenever they go back in time and they're at the drive-in theater And Marty McFly's like, oh, I'm just gonna run into those Indians, and Doc Brown's like, oh, you're not thinking fourth dimensionally, dude. You're not gonna be there. And then time travels, and who's there? Indians.
Yeah.
Well, Native Americans. Sorry,
Yeah.
Native Americans.
Mm-hmm. Well, this movie does have a lot of bad stereotypes about like not only Indians, but like just a ton of like that's one thing that bothers me about the movie is instead of it being like actual Western times, they made it like fake Hollywood Western.
Yeah.
Instead of like it being more of a realistic 1950s kind of like the second or the first movie, they just went full fake Western, which is kind of fun, but it was a little bit just kind of like, okay. But yeah, no, that was a funny bit. I literally in my notes just have blank bit of like just bits in the movie that I liked. One of them being the Einstein bit before he goes back in time. He 1955 Doc Brown's reading the note and he goes, and make sure please go back and take care of Einstein. And then he goes, Einstein? And then Marty McFly goes, yeah, your dog. And he goes, oh. And then like gets sad, but then his dog in 1955 says something and he goes, calm down, Copernicus. It's so funny. And I love the fact that we got more of 1955 Doc Brown, because that is the Doc Brown from the original Back to the Future, that dynamic that like made audiences fall in love with this franchise.
Yeah.
So the fact that they gave us a little bit of more of him in the first act, decided to kind of send Marty off, really highlights a positive of the movie. Another major positive for me is that the motivation of this film is very much so dependent on the relationship between Marty McFly and Doc Brown. Like it's all about Marty McFly deciding, no, I'm going to go get my friend back.
Even though he was like, no, whatever, don't come for me. And the reason he does go back for him is because he was murdered by Buford Tannen. I'm thinking Buford T.
From Smokey and the Bandit.
God. Wow.
Different movie.
Yeah. But so that's ultimately why, because he doesn't want to see his friend get murdered, and it's very unfortunate. So it, like you said, it does rely on their relationship.
Yeah, it brought it down to a more personal level.
Absolutely, yeah. And one bit that I absolutely love in the beginning, because again, you have to think about it. Like this is still 17-year-old senior in high school, Marty McFly. He walks into the tavern and he's like, "Can I have an ice water?" And then everyone just starts laughing their ass off because they're in 1885, and they're just like, we don't drink ice water in here. We drink whiskey. And he's just like looking at it and he's like, ooh, because, you have to think about it when you're young. Yeah. And if you did underage drink, which we don't support at all, it's absolutely stupid. But in that time, you drink and it's just like, ooh, it's not fun. Yeah. So it's little things like that further the character development in my eyes.
Yeah, and I love how Doc Brown invents shit. Like he makes a refrigerator and he makes this iced tea. It was so funny. I also love that this movie kind of takes focus away from Marty and more on Doc Brown and what like kind of Doc Brown wants, because it's very much so a send-off for that character. Mm-hmm. And it does touch on Marty's family a bit. I think you get Leah Thompson's best since the first movie. She was great in 1955. Yeah. But you get a little bit of her as like this Irish immigrant, and she does a really, really great job, I think. Mm-hmm. And can't get Crispin Glover back, so they just had Michael J. Fox do the husband, which was interesting to see. Another great thing I like about this movie is it shows kind of more character growth in that, like in this movie, Doc Brown was very much open to knowing about the future, whereas in the past, he ripped up Marty's letter like, no, I don't want to know anything about the future. But since it saved his life once, when Marty gets to 1885, he's like, all right, tell me everything. What's going on? Because he's like, clearly you wouldn't have come back if it wasn't for a big reason.
Exactly. Something I like now that we're talking about the third movie is that they do this in the second movie as well. Whenever Marty gets to Hill Valley, he always just like takes in his surroundings and just like almost can't believe where he's at and believe that it's real, that time travel is real. And I really like that. And they use the same bit over and over again, even from the first one, with Marty getting knocked out in some fashion, and then wakes up with Leah Thompson. He's like, Mom, like, oh, I had this horrible dream, and it sounds like his mom because it's still Leah Thompson. It's that family tree, and it's just it's formulaic, but it's still like
it's tradition.
It's tradition, and you don't
like
break tradition.
You go to the movie looking for it. It's kind of like going to Die Hard, being like, he better say yippee-ki-yay.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like that. And something else I really like about this movie is, unlike the second one, this story is very character based and more of a personal touch. And while this movie isn't nearly as fun as Back to the Future 2, I do think it's more emotionally resonant than Back to the Future 2. You know, you get Doc with his new love interest, Clara, in the movie. And the actress's name is leaving me, but she gave a great performance. They just bonded over a bunch of nerdy shit.
Which is so funny because on Doc Brown's tombstone, it says, like, erected because of Clara.
Yeah.
And he goes back and he's like, who's Clara? And he's like, I have no idea. Like, me fall in love?
Yeah.
Please, I'm a man of science. I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
And then he meets Clara, and he does exactly what happened is he falls in love at first sight. And it's fun character things like that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and a great character arc for Doc Brown is going from being a man of science and using only his brain to finally being able to act on emotion. Because there's a great scene with Marty where he suggests that he's going to stay. And then Marty's like, no, you're a man of science. That's not how you're supposed to think. And you kind of see him like kind of be like, you're right. But you can tell it's not what he wants.
Yeah.
And then even when he suggests like bringing Clara with them, you're like, no. He's like, we can't do that. And then so at the end with the train in the third act, which is exciting and fun.
Oh,
like,
it's so much fun.
Trying to get the DeLorean to 88.
And then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
It's such a fantastic sequence.
They put the icing on the cake when Marty gets the hoverboard and like throws it to him. It's so fucking fun.
And it's set up early on in the movie too, because Doc Brown's like, hey, don't forget that floating device. And he's like, oh, hoverboard, and throws it in the car. And you're like, why would he need a hoverboard in 1885?
Yeah.
And then it doesn't bring it up until the very end.
Yeah, it was really, really good stuff. And just when you see, like, even Marty, who's literally his only goal was to go back and bring Doc back, when he sees him holding her and them going off on the hoverboard, he's just like, and shuts the door. And, like, it was just, like, a nice moment of just, like, okay. And just kind of lets him go. But at the same time, because I could see on paper, if you were told, hey, this movie's about him going to get Doc, but then he doesn't get Doc, you'd be like, oh, well, that just seems like a wasted opportunity, a waste of time. But emotionally, you don't feel like the movie was a waste at all in that moment.
And a big emotional part in this movie that I really love is whenever they're having the town hall party and ZZ Top is playing, which, why not? That's probably my favorite sequence in that movie is because you get that like pure emotion between Doc Brown and Clara, and just how much that Doc Brown is like infatuated with her, and to me that's when Doc Brown is like, I'm going to stay in the past, like this is who I want to be with.
And also I love that scene too because of the frisbee bit. Oh, frisbee pies, that's cool. And then later and like uses it. That shit was so funny to me. And also I just noticed it upon my most recent rewatch. The actor who gets him to do the shooting game played one of the main roles in Blazing Saddles.
Really?
So it was like bringing that gut from that Western into this Western, and he kind of does this kind of the same characteristics. So I was like, that's pretty funny.
That's
like I never knew. Obviously when I was a kid, I never watched Blazing Saddles, so I never put it together, but it was just a cool, subtle thing that they did that I liked.
Yeah.
But one of the negatives with this movie is that while it is more emotionally resonant, it's because of that reason it's not as engaging on a physical level. Like it's not as fun as Back to the Future 2 or 1 for that matter. Like 1 was the perfect balance, 2 was all fun, 3 is all emotion in a way. I mean, they have bits of, greatness, but that's just kind of how I feel on like a basic level about them.
Yeah.
And the script is a lot less subtle for Back to the Future 3. Like they just kind of tell and throw everything at you.
Yep.
Oh my god, I love the bit with Strickland, how he's like the sheriff.
The sheriff in town.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
That was great. But one thing I do like is in the third act of this movie, it does give a sense of urgency, like when Buford comes to kill Marty and then they have to make the train, and it's like, God. Oh, and I love how Marty points it out. He's like, when Buford shows up and he goes, Clint Eastwood, and then Marty looks at the clock and it's 7:55 and he goes, damn, why do we always cut these things so close? I thought that was so funny.
Yeah.
I love the Clint Eastwood thing.
Oh yeah, that whole sequence is awesome. The shootout,
Mm-hmm.
because he doesn't know what he's gonna do, but then he remembers that Clint Eastwood movie,
And I like how he just like tells people that that's his name.
Yeah.
Because like the first movie, the great bit of like, Calvin Klein's your name, right? It's written all over your underwear. Shit's so funny.
Yeah. But in 1885, fucking nobody knows who Clint Eastwood is because he wasn't born.
No.
But yeah, I just love that he's like this cowboy, and like he shows up in this like pink garb or whatever it was, the outfit that like he's like, is this really what people wore in 1885? And he's like, Doc Brown's like, yeah, have you ever seen a Western movie?
He's like, come on. And then he gets there and everyone makes fun of him.
I've never seen Clint Eastwood wear this. And even 1955, Doc Brown's like, who's Clint Eastwood? Like, it's just, it brings it all together for me.
Yeah. It's great. It's great. And, I thought it was a fitting end to the trilogy, and especially him learning the lesson to not let words get to him, or he doesn't race that guy.
Because he's yellow.
Yeah. And doesn't hit the car. He's able to, avoid that future. And then the You're Fired from Back to the Future 2 gets erased, and, all of that comes together. And then you see Doc come in the fucking flying time machine train and tell him goodbye. And it was a nice fitting end for the Doc Brown character overall. And, it was a nice little wholesome movie.
It's a fun trilogy, to say the very least, in layman's terms. It's a very fun, enjoyable trilogy that you can just pop on at any time and just really enjoy it. And you don't have to watch it in order either, because like you were saying with Evil Dead, in each of the movies they recap basically the last one, how the last one ended. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But that's going to really do it for the franchise spotlight of Back to the Future. Thank you, Ryan, for this. I like that we're doing these together now. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And don't forget to follow us on social media, subscribe to us on YouTube, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.